the Broke Millennials podcast, yeah.
Alright. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 2 of the Broke Millennials podcast. I'm Theresa Huiber. I'm a real estate agent in Michigan. My social media is at the Michigan Expert everywhere.
I'm Nikki Rini. I am a loan officer here in Michigan. My social media is at the Rini Home Loans or at Rini Home Loans everywhere.
So last week, Nikki, now we have to. We're figuring out our setup. We've got a logo officially now. We got officially a channel now. We're working on the setup. I'm gonna turn a little bit so I can actually look at you when I talk to you.
That's
Why
a good
didn't
idea.
I think about that?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So, last week we talked about the inflation and everything, and why are groceries so expensive, everything like that. On this podcast, we want to be doing, education things, like I never cared about or knew about finances before I worked in real estate. I'm learning a ton, mostly from you.
Thank you.
So it's just more of like spreading the knowledge of like people who don't do this kind of stuff every single day. What are things that you actually need to know about? So today, what are we talking about, Nikki?
We are talking about inflation, and then we're going to segue into the tinfoil hat theory time.
Yes.
About the Federal Reserve.
I'm so excited about tinfoil hat theory. We're going to add a segment, guys, about like conspiracies, especially like economic conspiracies. Not especially, but completely. Because other conspiracies, they don't relate. So, I'm super excited about that. So, in preparation for this podcast episode, I did a lot of binging about the Titanic, and I did a lot of binging about the Fed and the history of the Fed. So let's start off with, because last episode we kind of touched on what the Fed is, but this episode is really going to be like focused on that. So, let me tell you what I learned, and then do you want to like correct me?
Sure.
Okay. So what I learned was that the Fed was, you told me this last week that I learned from our episode that it's actually a private bank. So when I went and I like watched a bunch of other YouTube videos and stuff, I didn't know that there were the bank panics. I didn't know that this was all being talked about because people were pulling their money out of the banks, and the banks were all private. There were no government backings of any banks. So then they would go pull all of their money out of the bank because they thought it was failing, and then they would go put it in another bank, and then they just basically reached out to like wealthy people who were willing to front money to keep these banks alive because it was going to destroy the economy if all of these banks were closing.
So the wealthy people, the people who run the Federal Reserve are not fronting their own money.
But they were at the beginning in 1913,
yes,
right?
Yes, the Fed was created in December of 1913. It's not, the funding actually comes, the funding for the Fed comes from the Fed buying bonds and giving the banks access to funds, but the access to those funds doesn't come from the like JP Morgan or the other people of the Fed. It's still that's a big reason why we're $34 trillion in debt.
Okay. It's still government money. Okay.
But it's just not ran by the Federal Reserve is just not ran by the government, but it's still government money.
Right, and so the thing about that, it is
concept.
confusing. And when I first heard that, when you first told me last week that the Fed is actually not government run, I was like incredulous. I was like, what do you mean it's not government run?
That's a big word.
But
what does incredulous mean?
Incredulous is like I so offended, like, oh my god, like, I can't believe this. I'm so bad with word definitions. I might not have even used that completely correctly. But I was like, oh my god, like, ooh, that's so horrible. But then as I was binge watching things, I was like, oh, it's supposed to be like a third. So I guess the intentions behind it was that it's supposed to be a third party so that it doesn't become...
like decentralized.
Exactly, so that it's not controlled by the Democrats or the Republicans or whatever. So it's like it's supposed to be a good thing that it's a third party, but like now it seems like it's not a good thing because we're just being controlled by whoever's the most wealthy.
Well, and
I don't get it.
The president elects the members of the Fed.
Okay. So it is technically still controlled by a party.
Yeah, it can be, exactly.
Yeah. Because why would a president pick someone that they oppose so many views on?
Exactly. Like they've been interviewing, in a lot of the interviews, they've been asking Trump if he would keep Jerome Powell as the head of the Federal Reserve, and he has said that he will not.
Okay.
So we probably will have a new Fed president if the orange man wins. But
does Jerome Powell have like a political affiliation?
no, you don't know. You know, they don't talk about it. They're not supposed to have any influence from the, you know, their goals are, the Federal Reserve's goals are supposed to be controlling inflation, financial stability, and maximum employment, which is ironic because the Federal Reserve has talked about a lot over the last couple of years that the labor market's too strong. And so their point of the rate hikes has almost been to like the market has reacted, the stock market and bond market have reacted negatively when we get really strong jobs reports. When we get really strong jobs reports showing more job openings than the market's expected, it's been making bonds in the market go down because essentially, in not so many words, Jerome Powell and the Fed have said, we kind of want to see less job openings. We want to see they want to see wage growth slowing because they believe that the labor market...
wages are already such a problem for us. So many people are so overworked and underpaid right now.
I agree with that, but it's the Federal Reserve's perception of inflation that matters, and their perception is that wage growth is too strong. Even in the report that we got today,
well, how do they have the what makes them have that perception? Is it just because they're so out of touch?
No, it's the reports that they look at on wage growth and on employment. So a great example is today we got the Fed's preferred inflation gauge comes out every month at the end of the month. It's called the Personal Consumption Expenditure Report, and it gauges inflation. And it came out at 2.8%. But the main reading excludes food and energy prices because they're volatile. So the headline PCE, which includes food and energy, came out at 2.4%, and the Fed's target goal for inflation is 2%. So we're close. We're getting closer. Now, for all you people that are like, hey, how is inflation coming down? I'm still paying more for stuff. You are. Inflation coming down does not mean prices are coming down. It means that the growth of prices year over year has slowed. Last year, and in late 2021, inflation was over 5%. It got up to a high of 9%. Now we're down to 2.4%. So prices are still up on average over 2.4% year over year, but there are still a lot of things, mainly necessities, like groceries, like insurance, like housing, that are up more than 2.4%.
Right.
And so these reports are what the Federal Reserve relies on. We also got a jobs report out today, and in that jobs report, it showed that wage growth was at 1%, which was actually much higher than the market expected. So that's where they're coming to the realization to them that wage growth is too strong.
Yeah, that's crazy to me.
It is crazy to me too. It doesn't make sense.
There's so many things that just don't make any sense. Like, what is the real reason for them having this logic that doesn't logic?
Because they believe that, and this is just me kind of trying to understand it, is that what the Fed's belief is that in a capitalist setup like we have, is that supply and demand controls prices. And so when you have wage there, and we've seen prices skyrocket. So to them, jobs market's too strong and wage growth is too strong and there's too much demand. So what they're trying to do is hammer demand. And that's all they have the tools to do. Because the Federal Reserve, at the end of the day, they have two ways that they can impact the market.
So that's why we have the problem with the housing inventory. They want it to be harder for buyers.
No, so actually Jerome Powell has stated that, like, he pretty much doesn't care about the housing market. They care about inflation overall. They don't have specific industries that they're watching that they're like, this needs to get better. They're just trying to control inflation overall. And so there's two ways they're doing that. Number one, they're increasing the Fed funds rate. The Fed's fund rate does not directly control mortgage rates. However, the way it impacts the bond market makes it, usually if the Fed funds rate is going up, usually mortgage rates are going up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, the other way that they can impact the markets is by them buying bonds and securities. So a great example of this is the pandemic. During the pandemic, they shut down the whole economy, right? And to prevent the economy from falling apart, the Fed started buying an absolute shit ton of bonds and mortgage-backed securities. A mortgage-backed security is when lenders, after you buy a house, right, the lenders take your loan and they group it with thousands of other loans, and they sell it on the secondary market as an investment. And hedge funds, big banks, and the Fed can buy these mortgage-backed securities, and it provides liquidity to lenders in the economy. And so during the pandemic, the Fed was pumping billions and billions of dollars every month. They were buying billions of bonds and mortgage-backed securities every month to pump up the economy. So low. Yes, on top of them dropping the Fed funds rate to zero. So those two factors combined to keep rates insanely low.
Yeah, it created, I feel like a lot of people, at least anyone who's looked into it enough, they understand that that happened and it created this like storm. But then, like, I just kept going back to when I first learned about this, and I only cared to learn about it because I work in real estate, so I really don't know how much other people, like, have an interest / know, but it's almost like you should know this, that's why this is important to me to, like, put this on the internet, you know? But then my question that I keep going back into my mind is, like, why did it, you know, like, the Fed was created, like, can we go back to the history, though?
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. Because, like, the Fed was created because people were pulling their money out of the banks. They needed something to kind of, like centralize the banks.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen again. But, like, it just seems like it's, like, corrupt.
I don't disagree.
And maybe it didn't. So then we need to go back to, I guess, the conspiracies and everything too, because let's just like cue the music and put on the tinfoil hat. It's a good segue right here. Welcome to my beautiful hat creation. Doesn't Nikki look amazing in it? Let me actually like turn it over to you, Nikki, and then I'm gonna like throw more questions at you, but let's go to the conspiracy and then let's tie the conspiracy back to day-to-day life here.
So the Federal Reserve was created in December of 1913. The Titanic sank in 1912, right before the Fed was created. And the tinfoil hat theory is that, so J.P. Morgan, the owner of the guy who created Chase Bank, he actually was one of the main like owners and essentially, but he funded like the building of the Titanic. And
he was supposed to be on the maiden voyage, and then this is everything that I learned. He was supposed to be on the maiden voyage of the Titanic, and then all of a sudden, oops, I'm going to delay my travel plans. Oh, excuse me, Mr. Morgan, why did you delay your travel plans? Now, I listened to a lot about this, but there was one detail that kind of didn't line up for me, because there was another guy, can't even remember his name. He also was going to, like, he's going to be on there, or there was some conflict with him, but then they didn't know of each other's plans until after the Titanic had sank.
Yes.
And so there was like a couple of discrepancies that made me feel like, oh, maybe it really is just a conspiracy. But at the same time, there's enough pieces that are not put together in a puzzle where it makes me say, like, I don't know, is this possible?
Well,
did he not go on the Titanic for a reason?
So
did he know it was going to sink?
So the tinfoil hat theory is that there were 3 other like huge millionaires that were on the Titanic, and it is rumored,
and that they opposed the creation of the Fed.
The rumor is that they opposed the creation of the Federal Reserve. And so Mr. J.P. Morgan decides a week or whatever before that he was supposed to be on it, nah, I'm skipping out on this ride. And these 3 people were still on it, and then they disappeared. And now you don't have any more people, or any more super powerful people that oppose the creation of the Federal Reserve System.
The other numbers that really jumped out to me were, in the Titanic, 1,500 people died and about 700 people survived. And so, like less than half of the amount of people that actually died in the Titanic, which is freaky. But at the same time, we did have like 700 survivors. Why wasn't one of those 700 one of those millionaire people? Why did all 3 of them die?
That's great.
Because there wasn't as many survivors as victims, But there was still, yes, I need the tinfoil hat. Yes, thank you very much. So do you see where I'm going with this?
Yes.
Like,
it is an interesting conspiracy for sure.
Right.
And not something that you see Jack talking about on there. You know, Leo didn't talk about this in the movie.
Right.
Celine Dion didn't sing about it.
Right. The movie was just the plot, the storyline, the people.
And this is, I feel like, almost a more interesting story.
Right. Where's the movie about this? Where's the movie about this conspiracy theory? Dang.
Be a good one.
I don't know. Like, I feel like it's plausible. There were a couple of other theories, conspiracies with the Titanic, and the one was that it was actually the Olympic, and the Olympic had been damaged, but they didn't want to pay the insurance, so they basically committed insurance fraud, and that what actually sank was the Olympic, and then they just kept the Titanic, and the Titanic was in great shape and made its actual first maiden voyage, but called it the Olympic later. And so that one didn't seem that interesting or that possible to me, because, like, why would you'd have to be incredibly cruel and incredibly stupid to risk that many people's lives with a broken ship that you're going to commit insurance fraud, you know? I mean, I don't think that they intended for it to hit an iceberg and crash, but at the same time, like, big of a risk.
We don't think.
Right, big of a risk, I feel like you would have to be incredibly stupid for that.
Well, and
so
I think that when you look it up also, you see that, like, they didn't have anywhere near the amount of life jackets or lifeboats that they were supposed to have, or a lot of the security and life-saving measures that were supposed to be there were not there.
All signs point to they really didn't think that it was going to happen, or did they just stage it to make it look like they really didn't think it was going to happen?
Who knows?
I don't know. I mean, people with a lot of money and power, they don't care if people, innocent civilians die in situations. So, I mean, it's hard for me to wrap my head around, but I don't know. Oh, the third conspiracy was that there was a mummy that, like, had a curse.
I saw that.
Yeah, that there was, like, a mummy that was being transported on the Titanic, that it was cursed or something like that. And that was obviously, like, I spent the least amount of time on that conspiracy because it's not even possible. The insurance fraud made me, like, raise my eyebrows, like, maybe. And then the JP Morgan, the Fed creation thing is the one that I feel like it could honestly be real.
Now, a lot of historians have come out and disputed this and said that it's absolutely not true, and we'll never know. But they said that the reason that J.P. Morgan bailed on the ride was because they had just passed some law in Paris that about, like, art and jewelry and stuff, and so he had they said that he went to Paris to, like, get all of his expensive art and jewelry before this law passed, and that he was sick. But, of course, historians would dispute that.
Right.
And, I mean, rich and powerful people have tried to hide things before. So, you know, we'll never know, but it is definitely an interesting tinfoil hat theory.
Right. And then the other thing about that is, like, I don't know, I guess JP Morgan was already kind of running the economy, I guess, from his mansion, like his library in his mansion, just remotely. And so it was like he was already helping, but then it became like an organized thing. And so I don't know. Was JP Morgan a good guy or a bad guy? Or neither?
So great question. I don't really know. But part of me is not too fond of big banks in general.
Right.
So,
because who would be?
You know.
Besides a banker.
Yeah. Even as a loan officer. Still,
Right.
I'm not a fan of big banks or big companies in general. I feel like they haven't done this country a lot of good.
Right. So he just, I don't know, I guess they were reaching out to him as, like, a wealthy person, like, hey, fix the banks. But then, of course, for him, like, he found, I mean, the name still lives on today, so I guess.
Who knows who reached out to who, you know?
Right.
I feel like...
I wonder how much he capitalized on it is what I'm asking. And I wonder exactly how much, when you already have a lot of money and power, I don't know what would make people want more than they already have.
Well, I think history. I think history has shown that, like, if you look at people like Alexander the Great and a lot of people, Napoleon, you know, Hitler. Like, think about it. Like, these people had a lot of power before, and they still, the people who tried to take over the world. So, as normal people, it's hard for us to wrap our heads around, but these people aren't normal people.
Psychology majors, educate us. What's going on in those psyches? Because we can't figure it out, that's for sure. So, anyways, I mean, I guess the question of today is, the Fed exists. It's never going anywhere.
Probably not.
It's a thing that we're frustrated with often, because we feel like we're just at their whim. They just set whatever rate, and we just have to do whatever they say. And that's incredibly frustrating, especially for me as like a really authority defiant person. I'm like, what do you mean the rates are 8? You just get to make up a number and just slap it on there?
Well,
so like,
keep the Fed funds rate isn't 8%. The Fed funds rate is currently 5.25%. Rates are higher than that, though,
I know.
because
I was just throwing out a random number.
Yeah, the Fed isn't buying mortgage-backed securities right now, so mortgage rates are higher because the Fed funds rate is higher, and they're also not buying mortgage-backed securities, so there's not as much liquidity in the mortgage market.
Right. So like, I guess the question is like, are they still good? Do we still need them? What would happen if they didn't exist?
There's a really good book. I believe it's called The Beast of Jekyll Island, and it's about this. And shout out to Ron Paul. He's a libertarian from Kentucky, and I believe. And
sounds about right.
He states that the Federal Reserve doesn't need to exist, and that the U.S. Department of Treasury should just control this stuff. It should be controlled by not some random private group of bankers. But there's a lot of economists who are smarter than us who probably have a better answer for this. But I do feel like they've been wrong a lot of different times. I mean, so the Federal Reserve was created in 1913 to create financial stability, and then we had the most financially unstable time in American history starting in 1929, right? And then we've had many more problems after that.
Yeah, so the Fed didn't really prevent the Great Depression.
No.
The Fed did not prevent the economic problems we're having now. What is this like?
Well,
are we in a recession officially?
No, we're not. We're not officially in a recession right now, but many people say, like, this, the whole reason inflation got to the point it was because the Federal Reserve fucked up on inflation, for a better lack of words. So when inflation started ticking up in late 2020 and early 2021, when they had the Fed funds rate at 0 and the Fed was buying all these bonds and mortgage-backed securities, people were asking Jerome Powell, like, hey, inflation is starting to tick up. Like, should you guys do something about it? And his famous words were that inflation was transitory. What transitory means is that it's just going to go away on its own.
And it's not.
And it didn't.
It's not like
it
that.
It didn't. They were very, very wrong.
There was also the great inflation of the 70s. It was in the 70s that there was like, it was up to
late 70s.
Yeah, it was up to like freaking 15% then.
Yep.
So the Fed has not prevented us from any major issues. So it's like, I don't know, man. Like,
yeah, I feel like it's not necessary, but then again, what do I know? So, it's just an interesting topic, and
it's important to be educated on, as like us being our early 30s age that we are. I never cared about this shit before, ever. It was like, put a roof over my head, pay my rent, get some groceries in my pantry, and we're good. But like now, like thinking about the stretches of life, we have to be financially responsible. I don't want to be, but we have to be, because it's not like they're setting us up with no nice retirement plans anymore. So we have to know about this kind of stuff. And I feel like, the knowledge is really going to be power as we come into older age and we have a little bit more like decision power, at least for our own lives.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of things back in the day where I'd be like, I don't know anything about that policy. I don't know anything about it. I don't have an opinion about it. And maybe if I had cared a little bit more and been a little bit more responsible, I could have actually said something, helped myself, helped someone else.
Yeah,
so,
at the end of the day, we don't get to vote in members of the Fed. It's, they're elected by the president. So
so it's like, there's nothing we can do about it right now, but I just still feel like it's really important to understand.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
As like a responsible adult.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and there's some interesting tales and tinfoil hat theories about it.
There freaking are,
so.
man. I had fun with that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Do you think that the Fed will ever disband?
No, we would have to it would have to be something that joking FBI agent to who's watching this, but we would have to revolt. There would have to be a revolt or some type of major occurrence that caused them to want to do that. And if you look at the history of Jerome Powell, for example, before he got elected as a member of the Fed, he was a member of the United States Treasury Department. He worked for major hedge funds and financial institutions, and it's kind of like a revolving door through all these different things. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think that the powers that be would ever disband the Fed. And I mean, last year, for example, we had some huge bank failures. There were a lot of banks that completely disappeared essentially last year because of liquidity issues. And the Fed did bail out a bunch of the banks by creating this emergency bank fund that all these small regional banks had to borrow hundreds of billions of dollars from to stay in existence essentially. Wow. And there were still several banks that failed. And there are still some that are in trouble now due to commercial real estate and bonds that they're holding that are now essentially worthless.
So, okay, maybe this needs to be its entire own episode, but I guess I've been talking to some people around my parents' age. They're in between 50 and 60, and a lot of them have said to me that they don't trust the banks anymore. And one guy even told me that he pulled all of his money out of the banks.
It would be really cool if we all did that. Joking FBI agent.
Joking FBI agent. But he actually did this though. As of a year ago, he pulled all of his money out of the banks. He literally operates with cash out of a safe. He uses his bank accounts just to go in and out his bills. Anything extra he has left over, he pulls out hard cash and keeps it in his house, which to me is scary because you can get robbed, someone can break into your safe, you can have a fire. I know they make a lot of the safes fire safe, but still it's just cash. It can just be gone with the wind.
Your money in the banks is insured by the FDIC, which is not the Fed.
Okay.
But these banks, the way the banking system works is that when you give them money, they don't just keep your money in a neat little pile somewhere. They go and buy stuff with your money and lend your money. And so
that's why they want your money.
The reason that these banks failed is because they took everybody's money, right? And they were we're going to go buy the safest thing ever, bonds. And they bought all these bonds when rates were really, really low. So they were buying bonds that had a 1% rate or a 2% rate. And then when rates shot up, well, why would anybody want a 1% bond when you could go buy one at 5% now? And so nobody wants these bonds that these banks are holding on to, and these banks failed because a bunch of people went and were taking money out of them, or these banks had essentially bills coming up that they had to pay, and they couldn't pay them because they couldn't sell their bonds.
Interesting. I think next episode or a future episode, we should do a full exploration of what would happen if everyone took their money out of the bank.
It would be really bad.
It would be really bad. Okay, we're going to leave you guys...
It would be really bad, FBI agent. It would be really, really bad.
We're going to leave you guys on a cliffhanger with that because, the whole exploration of the Fed, I think it was important to cover today. I'm really enjoying doing this, and we're going to be, guys, we decided it's going to be every Thursday we're going to put out our episodes. So thank you for listening to episode 2. Episode 3 is coming out next Thursday, and we're going to cover... Do you think that's what we're going to do?
Yeah, sure. Who knows? Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. We're kind of flying by the seat of our pants. We're not planning people. We're just kind of just hang out and chat kind of people. So, all right. Peace. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.
Have a great day.
It's the Broke Millennial Podcast.